Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the greatest rock and roll stories in the universe, all from the fans' perspective. It's Rock Stories with the Brumster. Now, here's the host of the show, my rockin' daddy, the Brumster.
Yeah, and it's with two M's, right? You see one M get out of Dodge, Brumster here. You can check out Hard Drive at 5 with the Brumster every Friday at rockradio559.com from 5 to 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And Rock Stories with the Brumster every Sunday at 11 there as well, rockradio559.com and on demand. At the Brumster Facebook page, BNFOB, a friend of the Brumster. Also as well, the Brumster Spotify channel. And again, all things Brumster at rockradio559.com. Welcome, Rock Stories with the Brumster. This is real rock stories from the fans' perspective. It's really cool when we watch the rockers tell their stories. We love that. And of course, you know, I've been in radio for over 30 years, so I'm going to have some rockers and special people come on the program from time to time. It's just going to happen. But the jinx of this show, the juxt, if you will, of this show, the whole entire point of this show is the fans' perspective, pulling back the curtains so that you can relive those experiences with our guests on the phone today. The coolest concert artist memories that you have. If you're interested in joining us on the program, again, just come on over to Rock Stories with the Brumster. Check it out again. At the Brumster Facebook page. So excited to have you there on the program today. My friend Neil Glotzer is the person who introduced me to her, and so glad to be able to introduce her to you as well here on the program today. Wendy Kaufman, our guest today on Rock Stories with the Brumster. How's it going, Wendy?
It is so nice to be with you on the Brumster and the Kaufmanster and with your son, and I'm so happy to tell you some great stories.
Oh, that's awesome. You heard my son open the show. Was that cool or what?
He's so cute. You just want to grab him and hug him, although he wouldn't be so happy about a stranger coming after him and hugging him, I'm sure.
Oh, my gosh. Oh, Wendy.
Different world.
You're not lying. It is a different world, isn't it?
Oh my God. I think about, when we were kids, and of course, you introduced Neil Glotzer. Neil Glotzer is an old friend of both of ours. Neil, I went to high school with, I went to grade school with, I went to college with. I know him for forever. And, back in the day, when we grew up, our parents, we could play on the streets. It wasn't a big deal. The doors were open. It wasn't a big deal. Everybody was going to everybody's house, and on the weekends, every weekend, we would be like at the Nassau Coliseum or at some club, seeing music. So I, grew up with music being probably, other than food and later cocaine, the most important thing in my life.
Is music, right?
I have a lot of favorite things back in the day.
Well, I was watching Facebook. I was looking at Facebook. I was using Facebook. I'm a Facebook addict. I'm sorry. I was rocking Facebook the other day, going through and catching up on some of our friends and family members, and I come across my good friend Wendy at a Phish concert with your buddy, and I was like, whoa, you're coming on the show. I know you've got a lot of great stories, but to kind of start from the end and then go back to the beginning. So you were recently at a Phish concert. How cool was that?
Okay, so these were the rescheduled shows that was supposed to be the New Year shows over at Madison Square Garden. So I have been wanting, these are bucket list items because I'm a jam band chick, and I know about Phish for forever. And honestly, a few months ago, I had gone to Dave Matthews, who was playing with Dumpster Funk, which was probably one of the great shows in the history of my life. And when I tell you that I have been to thousands of shows, I am really not kidding. And then I just said, oh my God, I had seen as a Dead fan also Farewell V, the Farewell V tours in Chicago with Trey Anastasio. And I just said, you know what? I can't even joke around about this. This is bucket list stuff. I must go. And we went, and I subsequently, it may have been like the super spreader event over at the Garden. I guess they did this unbelievable show on the New Year's Eve show, which they had to do. They didn't have bands come in, but they built an aquarium, and I think that there was just water everywhere, and the stage lifted, and the lights were unbelievable. I mean, they were still mopping up water when we got there on Saturday night from the Friday night show, which was, I guess, Earth Day also, but they were unbelievable shows, and I'm so glad that I went, and it was just a thrilling night, and I have never seen so many of those light-up things being tossed around, and I guess the thing that just stands out, which is part of, I guess, Dave Matthews and Phish, and probably Warren Haynes and Government Mule and all those other, when we went to shows, we were so drugged up, that all we would do is just sort of get up every now and again and go to the bathroom, light a joint or something. I can't believe the energy, and people just dance for 3-4 hours. I would have a heart attack. Even as a kid, I would have had a heart attack. So that's the thing that just blows me away, because I don't know how anybody does that. I know they get some help, get a little boosted up there, but oh my God, it was unbelievable. Nobody sat for a minute, and I had the best seat because I was in a first row area with glass in front of me, and nobody could obstruct, and I could sit down.
You nailed it on the head. Back in the day, just drinking so much before the concert that I have the ticket in my pocket, and I'm like, well, I hope it was a good show because I partied a little bit too much. I was there, yay. I remember part of a song, but now I'm getting a little older, and I still get a beer, but I don't get 50 beers, and so I try to keep myself so I can enjoy the show now, which 20 years ago I wasn't that person either. And it's amazing now that I actually enjoy the whole show and remember the whole show. Holy smokes, these folks, like they are still at the top of their game, aren't they?
It's unbelievable because really when I think about it, listen, Mick Jagger is still rolling along. Keith Richards, that he's still even alive, is, I think that they should all do investigations into his DNA to figure it all out. But I just have to tell you, we would go, we would enjoy our shows, and even, as soul music was starting to really emerge or whatever, people were dancing, but nothing, like, what you get at a Phish show or a Dave Matthews show. And even, what I'm seeing now with John Mayer joining the Dead, you're bringing those kids in also, and to me, I mean, I'm old already. I'm practically a fossil. But you know what? Like, even as a young person, I'm not sure how fun it would have been because it's too much exercise. I mean, Jack LaLanne was just coming on TV.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome! Yeah, putting the thing in his mouth and like pulling a whole boat in the water across the ocean, man. I mean, Jack LaLanne was nuts.
Like he would be in his the exercise clothes, and bending one arm. I mean, you didn't even sweat, when you exercised back in the day. So I'm just laughing because I'm watching all these kids and they are just having the best time. And I look at them with wonder and awe, and I'm just, and maybe shock and awe. I'm not even sure, but you know what? I knew that they were all having a great time. It's impossible impossible to not. The light show that they do is extraordinary. I was off to the side, so I didn't really get the full benefit of it, but I am very, very grateful, that I had real Phish fans who were next to me, and they knew that it was my first show, bucket list item. They told me all the songs. They told me everything. They were really excited, to have some newbies there, even though we were all oldies but goodies. And it was just a wonderful, wonderful show. And listen, ask me about anything, because I am a music lover for sure.
Wendy Kaufman, our guest today, Rock Stories with the Brumster. That's with 2 M's. If you see 1 M, get out of Dodge. Rock Stories with the Brumster every Sunday at 11 at rockradio559.com. Also as well at the Brumster Facebook page and the Brumster Spotify channel. Check it out. Real rock stories from the fans' perspective. We've got super fan and friend of the Brumster on the program today, Wendy Kaufman. Wendy, you started the show off with a great retelling of your weekend here that you just had, bucket list seeing Phish. And I'm telling you, Dave Matthews, Phish, you mentioned The Dead. These are all bands that love their fans, and they actually promote the fans coming in and recording at their shows. There's a lot of artists who aren't so open these days, huh?
Well, you know what? I mean, it really started, I think, with the Dead back in the day. They really grabbed onto something which nobody had done. They let you come in, and they realized that they could make the bulk of their money on tickets and on merchandising. And the more play that they had and the more marketing that they had from people sharing music, it was going to be better for them to be able to keep charge and keep control of all of their personal effects and the things that you buy, all the merchandising. And that's where the fortune was for them. So I think, that these kids grew up watching the Dead, and becoming enamored with them and how it worked. Because I think, Mickey Hart grew up in my hometown. I don't know if you know that or if Neil ever told you that, but his dad was the accountant for the Dead when the Dead started, and I think that there was some problems with the father, and he did abscond with some money, and I think Mickey left the Dead because of his embarrassment, but they did come back to him and did ask him to come back and play with them, because the sins of the father really had nothing to do with the son, and they really loved him. But it was Mickey's father that did in fact put them on a path where the merchandising became king and cash became king like that. And, the other stuff was just collateral stuff that was just going to get them out there and make them, the mega stars and the mega, money makers that they became. But that's what happened with Mickey Hart and his family.
And they still got on the radio as well. So Mickey setting them off on that road to success, a non-conventional road to success, because everyone else is going through the record industry at that time, right? And radio, basically. And so through the fans and going that route and making your money from concerts and merchandise instead, it actually freed them up. And they eventually got enough momentum to where they ended up with some hits on the radio as well. So they kind of got their cake and eat it too kind of thing.
There's no question, one hand feeds the other, and they were just brilliant about how they executed. And your kids now, the Trey Anastasios and, the people, that are running around like Dave Matthews, they use the Dead, and what happened with them is prototypes for how they, could re-emerge, actually emerge right now, and become the legends that they are now, and they're doing the same philosophy, that worked so well back in the 60s.
It's so much better than just, immortalizing an Elvis Presley or what have you, and then putting him up there on his gold statue, and that's where he remains forever. But instead, we take these stars, and they become life lessons, kind of like blueprints, if you will, of how to do it, right? Like,
absolute, no question. It's just interesting because lately, listen, as a huge fan of music, and I worked, as a youngster, one of my first jobs was at the record store in Cedarhurst, where I grew up, and that is really where I was the oldest in my family, and of course my parents were right on the cusp. They were not Beatles fans, their cousins, their first cousins that were younger were more Beatles and Elvis fans. My parents were more, Frank Sinatra, Tony Bennett, of that ilk, and I totally respect the music. I think it's brilliant. I think there's nobody like Sinatra, Tony Bennett, and those guys, and actually Perry Como, who is just a superstar, he literally went over when my mother was young. She was living in Sands Point, which is part of northern Long Island, and Perry Como bought her father's house. And I remember it would be like the same thing as the Beatles coming to your door today and buying your house, and he gave them tickets for as long as they wanted in perpetuity, and he never sold that house, Perry Como. He died in that house, and my parents, until they wanted, it was a different time though. He always gave them tickets to every single show, and that is like unbelievable that could happen in a world, with such a superstar back in the day. But, we learned a lot. I had a mentor, in the place that I work called Platypus in Cedarhurst. I, like I said, was the oldest child, so I didn't have anybody really teaching me, but his name was Harry Kunkin, and he died way too young, but he taught me everything I know about Van Morrison and what was unbelievable about him, and Dave Mason, and Steely Dan had just come out with their first album, Can't Buy a Thrill, and they couldn't do live what they could do in the studio. I mean, I feel so special in so many ways because, while I missed a little bit the beginnings of the Beatles in the beginning, we got a touch of that, and the Rolling Stones or whatever, we really had the most unbelievable music in our lives. I think that we are truly gifted.
Van Morrison, Steely Dan, Dave Mason, you just went down like three of the best of all time, and we haven't even got started yet. That's amazing. Wow.
I mean, I was going to these concerts because Harry had introduced me. Back in the day, you would get all these great sample demo records into the stores. So every Saturday, we would be playing all the demo music and listening, and we were getting enormous amounts of stuff from Passport Records out in England. It was just Nectar had just come out from England, and everything was just Star Castle, had just shown up. Boston, everybody had a different sound. Of course, I'm a Long Islander. Billy Joel was out there, doing Captain Jack. I mean, it was an astounding time because the tickets to go to the shows were like $10, and your parents, they just wanted you gone, on the weekends because that's when they were going out and seeing their friends. So every weekend we would be at the Nassau Coliseum, seeing shows and going to clubs all over Long Island because there was either dancing or, dance music, had come in the 80s or whatever. But every weekend there were cover bands that were playing these bands, and every weekend you were just out listening to music and listening to new covers of different songs it was an extraordinary time.
And they were so approachable back then, weren't they?
You know what? It depends, what the clubs were and who the artists were, because you're always going to have artists, that were very standoffish and shy and just didn't want to deal with it, or they were totally messed up, and they didn't want to deal with any of the but outsiders or whatever. But if you were, let in to the backstage of different clubs, and sometimes I was, sometimes I wasn't. It depended upon who I knew in the audience that night. Most of the time everybody was sort of partying with each other. So I would say it was sort of a 50-50 thing back in the day. It really depended upon the day and who and how they felt that particular, and if they thought that they had a good show, because sometimes, they had a really crappy show and they were not interested in seeing anybody.
Kind of like an athlete who loses a game and you just don't talk to him, but the athlete wins the game.
Kind of like that, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. But, it's funny because I started to think about it. So what was my first concert? My first concert, just ironically, I went to camp in the Berkshires of Massachusetts. And it was interesting. It was back in the, I was born in 58. So it was about 1967 or 68, right before I turned, 10 years old. I was 9. And, I guess the counselors, usually we would go to this place in Massachusetts. It's a very, very famous venue called Tanglewood. James Taylor plays every year there for the 4th of July, either July 3rd, 4th, or both. He's very, very committed to that place, and it brings classical and, what you don't know, John Williams of Star Wars fame, he was the conductor over at the Boston the Boston Symphony Orchestra, and, the home of the Boston Symphony Orchestra during the summer is Tanglewood. So all these BSO people would come out to the Berkshires, and I want you to know John Williams, God bless him, he still comes every year and he conducts the film night or whatever. So it has very deep roots. Anyway, back in 1969, I guess the counselors had gone between themselves and had an edict that they wanted to go to Tanglewood. So most times back then, it was all classical music. So I don't think that the management of the camp really had a problem, but there we were, all these kids put on buses that we were going to Tanglewood. And the concert that night was a double feature of The Who and Jethro Tull.
What?
and we're a bunch of 9-year-old kids, and we get off the bus, and everybody is peace, love, and tie-dye, and people are like naked and braless, and pot is everywhere, and people are under blankets because many of the shows at Tanglewood, they're all lawn seats that go all the way to the back or whatever, and there is, there is like, a stadium that you can sit under a roof, but most of it is the lawn. And I just remember it was the first time as a 9-year-old that I was exposed to rock and roll, with the Who throwing all their shit everywhere. But aside from that, the people were going crazy, and you could see, that they were not normal because they weren't acting normal and they were so drunk. And everybody who I was with, they were afraid, of where the camp took us. And they had to call all of our parents and send notes home that all of us had been exposed to drugs, that we had all been exposed to rock and roll music, that we were all exposed to drinking, and all sorts of stuff. So, they got in trouble for that. But it was a great show. I mean, that is when I knew I really loved music. But I do remember also being online and calling up my parents and saying, I don't know why they put us here, because we didn't have money or anything. It was very bizarre. But it was definitely a trial by fire, and it was one of the great shows of all time in rock and roll history.
Well, especially being 9 years old and getting your first experience to be that experience. Talk about jumping into the water instead of just putting your toe in. You just jumped right in with the music.
Oh my God, it's just crazy. But my favorite artist, and like I just love to share about him, when I was 13 or 12, there was a song that came out, and I'm not sure which one came out first. I think it was Hello, It's Me, and then I Saw the Light. And I became an enormous Todd Rundgren fan and watched the evolution of Todd to Utopia, to all of the producing that he did and all of the interesting work that he did MTV and, because he was one of the first videos, I think, that were on MTV, and watching his astounding career over the last 50 years. I've probably seen him about 800, 900 times. I'm not even kidding. I've even gone to camp. I went to his 60th birthday party back in the day, was 65th. I do these nutty things. I've been to Vermont at the Von Trapp Hotel. He did a camp there. I follow him around, but I was always afraid to meet him because I just knew there was something a little off with him. And when you're a child, when you're like a child and you're totally afraid to meet, the fantasy of your life, because what happens if they do something or say something that's going to just hurt your feelings and take the entire fantasy, blow it right out of your head. So I really stayed away from him for years and years and years. And then later, and I was over 50 years old, I finally had the nerve, where I did go to camp and I did meet him. And it was really, really funny because he was a little bit off-putting and odd because he's very, very shy and I think has a bit of Asperger's. So socially, not the best. And I'm so grateful that I waited because, at that point, it didn't hurt me. It didn't hurt my fantasy, that he couldn't be what he wouldn't ever, live up to what my expectation would be is what I want to say of what he would say to me and do and be so happy that I was his fan, that it meant something because, I'm just the one of many, even if I was the Snapple lady.
Oh, Todd Rundgren. Oh my gosh, that you nailed it on the head. Like where you try to look him in the eye and it's like an uncomfortable, I'm looking for something else. It's nothing against you. It's just literally his brain is wired differently than most people's brains, which is why he's such an amazing producer, an amazing artist, amazing songwriter. How many people have benefited from his creative talent, especially in songwriting and producing? How many artists have gone to another level because they were working with Todd?
You know what? It's a really, truly an endless list. I mean, from Meatloaf, seriously. He tells a story that after the Bat Out of Hell album came out, he got a letter in the mail and he opened it. It was a royalty residual check or whatever because he had produced it and worked on that endlessly. And I think it was like $1 million check. Like crazy stories like that, I'm just trying to think Grand Funk, they were working on an American band, and all that stuff. And they had completed some of the songs and the album, with some of the completed songs had already gone up to like #1 on the charts, and they didn't even finish the album yet. You know what I'm saying? So they were stuck behind the scenes from the Straubs. It's just endless. Endless what he's done and who he's played with and who he's impacted. I guess Tame Impala, is who I know of recent, maybe they're New Zealand or Australia. I'm not really 100% sure. But you know what? All music, the Philadelphia Sound, Hall and Oates. I just saw Daryl and Todd over at Carnegie Hall a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, really?
And that was a great show. Oh, that was they did 7 shows together. I think that they're still touring. I was a little disappointed. Todd was just unbelievable. He just is a consummate showman. What I was reading, though, on Facebook, because I, like you, Rumster, I troll on Facebook sometimes. It seems that Daryl was having, great difficulty with the sound, which I don't think should have really been an issue at Carnegie Hall. So he was complaining a lot, and it appeared that he was complaining at a lot of shows. But he has such an unbelievable catalog between him and John Oates, and even Todd playing with them, of such unbelievably, infinitely important music. And, the only song that he really chose to sing that was of that ilk was Sarah Smile in the hour that he played. And I have to tell you, I was a little bit taken aback and disappointed because he had so much. And while Sarah Smile is a great tune, Todd and Daryl, the encore, they did "Wait for Me," which is one of the classic. You can see on YouTube Daryl's house and Todd performing together. It's a great song, but they didn't even do more than one song together, which was very upsetting in New York, particularly because I believe that they had done 2 or 3 at other venues before that, which led many of the fans to think, what happened? So I don't know what happened, but something may have happened. And maybe they're not going to play together anymore. I don't really know.
Oh, there might have been a tiff. We don't know, but there might have been a tiff between them. That's possible. That is.
Don't know. I just know that, three times, that they had, four, they had done 2, 3 encores, and New York only got 1. Something went on.
Something, you mentioned something too about artists that have this amazing catalog. The fans want to hear that catalog. That's why they're fans, if you will. And the fans come to a show, and then the artists, though, they get bored playing the same song over and over again. So they try to redo it differently, to make themselves feel just more entertained or not so bored with it. But the fans get robbed because we're like, no offense, I don't like that version. And I know that sometimes the special version is cool, like Tom Petty will do, or rest in peace, used to do Running Down a Dream or something like that, or I Won't Back Down, and do it really slow. And, some artists can get away with it. But some artists, I'm sorry, Daryl, I love you. I want to hear your catalog, man. You and John put out more hits than I think any human being on earth, right?
Can I tell you, that's why I was really stunned. Now, I heard a couple of songs that were very pleasing, and I was happy to hear them, but what you're saying is the God's honest truth, because there are so many talented music writers, and they are a direct, revisit to your youth, and, you just want to be there. You want to go back. It's been a horrific 2.5 years, and especially that everybody is, touring now, it's a throwback. It's a throwback to a better time. I know that Todd, the song that he hates the most, Rumster, is Hello, It's Me. And I have been completely pissed off and offended beyond, because I think that he is much better doing it for when he was running around with Ringo doing the All-Star Band, because those people didn't exactly know 100% who Todd was. So there was a reverence for those fans that didn't know him, so he would play it the right way, as to what you're saying. But to our fans, who have heard it 3 billion times, he would start jerking around and, messing with his voice. And, to me, I started to believe that it was starting to be on the cusp of really disrespectful to his fans. And I didn't like that at all. However, by the same token, he has a song, Born to Synthesize, and he changed that up, and I love, sometimes the newer versions, that he does to different songs, but Born to Synthesize is not Hello, It's Me, is what I want to say. So he has the levity at that point to do that, but, a classic, one, that brings you back to 13 years old, that you were, making out with Barry, you know what I'm I'm saying? And it's just, you always remember where you were and how you felt during that song. You just don't want it tampered with at some point.
It's a time machine, right? Wendy Kaufman on Rock Stories with the Brumster, behind the scenes from the fans' perspective. Thank you for being here with me, Wendy. It's a time machine, right? Don't mess with my time machine, dude, right?
It's 100%, 150%. You know exactly where you were when you sang out Bat Out of Hell, or Freddie Mercury, Scaramouche, will you do the fandango, thunderbolt and lightning? I mean, you remember. You totally remember. It's just like, where were you when Princess died? Where were you with Kennedy? Where were you when a certain riff happened, that you just couldn't get over?
Ooh, you're giving me goosebumps. I love you, Wendy. You rock. That's what I'm talking about, man. It is a time machine, and that's what we use music for. Where were we? What did we feel at that moment? Because when we hear that riff again and we hear it the right way, it reactivates the same emotion we had back then, doesn't it?
100%. God, I remember when Rumors came out, we just sat track after track. We had to hear, exactly what tune and how Nix was, going to knock this one out, and the affairs that were going on, and this one wasn't talking to this one. But I remember exactly where I was at my friend Matt Cohn's house, and I will never forget it, with the people that were around me, going track by track. And even at Platypus, this store that I worked at, I remember, hearing something for the first time, that it came to my attention, and you just stopped. And everybody in the store stopped. And you were like, oh my God, and everybody was like slapping each other 5. Oh my God, that is a hit. It was you know what? It's just, you can't make this stuff up. And I'm so happy that you and I were able to live some of it.
Oh, you're living it with Wendy Kaufman, Rock Stories with the Brumster right now. From the fans' perspective, Sundays at 11 a.m. on rockradio559.com, and also as well, Brumster Spotify channel, brumsteranchor.fm, and be an FOB, a friend of the Brumster, at the Brumster Facebook page. That's with 2 M's. We're with Wendy Kaufman, a friend of the Brumster, on the show today. Rock Stories from the fans' perspective. And what an awesome fan on the show today, and an awesome friend to have you here, Wendy. You talked about how it is borderline offensive if you're a real fan. John Mellencamp, Johnny Cougar, if you will, he was
I know him well, yep.
He was on an interview with Dan Rather. And he's painting. He's a painter. He's a real artist. That's all he does. And I've been getting into acrylics myself lately. It's kind of an insane addiction. I don't know what it is. Just I started painting. Anyway, sidetrack. Yeah, shiny.
I think it's great. Any artistic endeavor, you go for it.
Shiny thing over here. I lost track. Sorry about that. It happens sometimes. No, I love painting, and it reminds me, John Mellencamp, he's an artist. He's painting there, talking with Dan Rather on the show. And Dan asks him, so do you love playing all your old hits and, Pink Houses and Hurt So Good and Jack and Diane? He goes, I hate it. He goes, I can't stand it. He goes, but I have a job to do. These people have paid me with their hard working money, and that's what they want to hear. They want to hear Jack and Diane the way that I do Jack and Diane. They don't want me to be an artist up there, so I just suck it up and go up there and do my job and do it the way that they want to hear it. That's a professional, right?
I give him a ton of credit, because he'll play when he feels like it, and he won't when he just doesn't sell himself out. I was not in the music business, but I was in the very, very, grounded in the beverage business, and I had a very incredible life. And I have to tell you, I had my time. My time ended, in the beginning, not so gracefully, and then it became very gracefully. And you want to know something? I got involved with other things, and other things became more important. And it's like a lifetime ago, but not everybody who became really, really famous wants to stay in the public eye. And there's other things to life. You know what I'm saying? It is very, very grueling, and I remember this because I felt like a rock star without being a rock star, because we would have to make appearances all over the place, for different state fairs and festivals and this store and that amphitheater or whatever. And, at a certain point, we would look at each other. If it's Tuesday, it must be, Winnemucca, Nevada. If it's Thursday, it must be Davenport, Iowa. And after a while, it is really, wearing, I want to say, and it's not fun anymore, because you're not a normal person and you can't see things as other people. And I'm gonna just change the subject to this subject. My brother was my brother unfortunately passed away last year, my younger brother. He was an incredible musician. His passion for forever was guitar, and he could play with the best of them. And he went one summer to the Berklee School of Music, and the fellow who he had as his roommate was a fellow, you may know him, his name is Dominic Miller, who became the guitarist for Sting. So he's been in our family for years and years and years. And it was so interesting through the years because Alan and he always stayed very, very friendly. Dominic, of course, was recognized and went on tour with Sting, and he is very, very revered and loved as the true talent that he is, traveling all over. But you know what? When we go to dinner with him, it comes at a tremendous cost, because Alan got married and worked in our family business, played guitar, loved it, and always had bands and always had an outlet for it. And then Dominic would say how much he regretted that he didn't know his children, that he didn't have successful relationships with his wives at the time because of all the travel, and that there was a piece of Alan that always wanted to be Dominic, but there was a big piece of Dominic that always wanted to be Alan.
Right.
And that has been an unbelievable lesson in my life, because there's always a trade-off, and sometimes you just have to be true to yourself.
Right. And, when we're talking about these artists, like John Mellencamp, for example, who's delving into his painting and these other worlds, it's almost like, I've longed for this other existence. I became someone that was an object and didn't feel like myself anymore, is what they probably say to themselves. And so they want to be normal again, right? In a sense.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So they make their own environment. They pick and choose their own piece, where they can have some solitude, and creativity in another way, and feel just as good about themselves that they are creating. I created for Snapple a whole personality, a whole campaign with great teams of people and ad agencies that I worked with, but I'm a creative person. So, I toy around with writing. One day, maybe I'll write the book. You know what I'm saying? Because it's such a fascinating book, because, with somebody like me, I was a female who went way up the ladder, the corporate ladder, in a very, very masculine business, and I was certainly a persona non grata, for sure, and I also had just, stopped, a huge coke addiction, in 1989. I started Snapple in 91. Snapple was my sober job, but my boss, let me go on the loose, and be who I was always meant to be, and never got in my way. So it's an extraordinary story there, where he let me
Let's go
be
there.
me and become...
Let's go
You want to go there?
Yeah, folks. Rock Stories with the Brumster. Amazing rock stories. Wendy Kaufman on the program today. Such amazing stories. Van Morrison, Dave Mason, Steely Dan, Billy Joel, Boston. My goodness, Todd Rundgren, Daryl Hall, like Phish, The Who, Jethro, Tull.
I got to give a huge shout out, though, to my other faves, which was Genesis, and my heart is aching, about Phil Collins and how sick he's become. And, I just pray for him, that he just, lives his best life possible. He's retired, but I just want you to know that I go every year where I can to see the beloved Steve Hackett, who is the only band you can see now in order to have, anything close to Genesis. And they were, for me, certainly one of the greats.
Yep, 100%. And Phil Collins, I had a divorce early on in my life. And right after that, I just played Phil Collins over and over and over and over and over, and Genesis over and over and over. There's just something about that music. It's just so touching. And today, Wendy Kaufman, folks, has taken us back in time in her time machine with rock and roll, rock stories with the Brumster. But we're going to shift gears. You started talking about a story, and let's go there. Wendy Kaufman and the Brumster have something in common, Snapple. In between radio jobs, I had to get a real job. How many jobs you have, right? Like Haymon. I had to get a real job. And I went and I got a sales job working for R.K. Jones Beverage Distributorship out of Central California, selling Snapple. That's right. A year and a half, I hit the streets selling Snapple. I was the Snapple guy. And we all grew up with you, Wendy Kaufman, as the Snapple lady. Snapple rocks. You rocked. Talk about that adventure. Let's go there, man.
Okay, so it's a lot of years ago. I was working in I went to Syracuse is where I got my degree, and I was, at Newhouse School of Communication, so I was always very interested, television, radio, and the like. Anyway, when I got out of school, I did go into the film business. I didn't stay there for very long because my boss kept telling me to clean the table and get everybody coffee, and my father, who was one of the great feminists, in his day, said, do not ever feel like you have to take shit or be talked down to by any man. And at some point at that job, I said to him, if you want to hire, a housekeeper, please feel free, but it's not going to be me. And I ended up quitting. So that was that. I went to my family business, and through the 80s, I really became, going to concerts and running and going, and it was just the time, and it was, what we did back in the day is I did get addicted to cocaine, and in 1989, I remember I really was on my knees in desperation that I either wanted to die or to get well, and it was a really tumultuous time. And I remember going to the office and being in such bad condition that my family had somewhat of an intervention, and they didn't have to intervene for very long because I was completely amenable. And by that Friday, I ended up at a rehab called what was it? In New Jersey. I forgot the name of it, but it was like a 30-day program, and it was very chilling because I didn't know what to expect or whatever, but I literally had checked myself into a mental institution, and the doors locked behind me, and I was there for about 45 days. They exhausted my insurance, and when that gig was up, they told me that I really, really needed to think about, in all honesty and in truthfulness with myself, whether I was going to stay sober or not, because they felt that I would be dead within a matter of months. And in really feeling it and really understanding where I was in my life at that time, I knew that they were right. So they sent me, it was called Fair Oaks Hospital. It was part of Summit Overlook Hospital in New Jersey. And they told me about a place called Alina Lodge, which was a therapeutic community out in New Jersey. Anyway, I checked in, unwillingly, because I understood before I checked in that I had to give up smoking at that point, and I would have to give up like all of my, my addictions at some point, and that they were the real deal. Anyway, my 28-day program turned into a 10-month ordeal for me, and I was, locked away, but I really got it after about 5 months of everything. And when I finally left the place, I never left legally. They caught me actually gambling on the Kentucky Derby, and I got thrown out because you just can't gamble in rehab. You just can't have another addiction that you get caught at. But anyway, it turns out that I got thrown out of my family business, and Arnie Greenberg, who was one of the owners of Snapple, knew me very, very well. And the rules at Snapple was you were not allowed to have family or friends work for the company, but he went to them because he knew me, and he was probably my number one advocate and fan and believed in me more than I believed in myself, and went to his partners and said, I want this girl to work for us. And he did get permission. They knew that I was out of rehab, and they gave me this chance. And Arnie, who I will just love for the rest of my life, he took me in. He said, I'm not going to do you any favors. I'm going to give you $20,000 a year to start in the order department to learn the flavors and to learn about the business, and then it's up to you. And I started to notice not only, the flavors and what was going on, but that there were letters that were coming from fans that wanted to connect. And I also put two and two together that the safest place I understood where to be was out of my own head and doing nice things for other people, which would help exacerbate my good feelings about sobriety and doing right in the world.
Serving others. So you put your focus you put your focus outward, basically.
It was the only way that I knew that I was going to survive, is to get out of myself and to do service. And the Snapple Lady was a direct result of me being the person at Snapple to give back to the community, to the fans, to everybody who loved us. We were going to love them back, and they really let me run my own show until I became the head of public relations over there, because I could publicly relate. And then they hired a brand new ad agency to come in, and they saw what I was doing, and they actually built a campaign around me. And it was extraordinary, because here I am, this, fat, Jewish chick from Long Island, and I, a cokehead, a recovering cokehead, and honestly, I get earmarked, to be on this national campaign that they're going to do. So, let's look at the odds of that. And I remember calling my parents and telling them, that I was going to be the star of the Snapple campaign. And I remember my mother screaming on the phone, thinking that I was back on drugs again, because who would even make up such a story? But it was an amazing, amazing story that happened to me, that I was given a chance. Arnie ran the advertising, ironically. So it's like, it's all beshert. It's all, I totally believe that it was God's will be done, and it was, because I couldn't have manipulated myself out of a paper bag. And we had an unbelievable campaign. We went from a $23 million a year business. My first year on the air, we did $230 million. My second year on the air, we did 560 million. And my third year on the air, we did about 900 million, 780, 800 million, not sure. And then, we were taken over by another company and I was fired. And then they brought me back again, for another year. I kept picking up the pieces, with the new management. And then finally it went to Texas, and I just think that their culture versus the culture that we originally came from sort of clashed, and they didn't want to have anything to do with the founding fathers and what Snapple began as. So it was a really interesting story.
And Snapple back then was hot. Oh my gosh. Diet peach and regular peach tea. I first in the 80s and early 90s listening, to Rush Limbaugh with my dad. And it was just Snapple peach tea. Before you know it, I had packs of Snapple peach tea in my fridge at home, and everybody and their dog was drinking Snapple. And, it
was a phenomenon. You're 100% right. And that was the genius of this marketing. We talked already about Grateful Dead marketing and Dave Matthews marketing, and this was a different kind of marketing. While it was, the people that were making it happen and we were exacerbating it, we were going to love you. We were going to love you back. And it was organic, and it just sort of happened, and nobody was afraid, to let it happen. I remember there were tremendous fights that were happening at the office. How are you going to let that fat girl on TV representing? And you know what? Nobody cared. Oprah was on TV by then. Roseanne was on TV by then. We had Rush, who was doing the ads like you were saying. We had Howard Stern, who was doing ads also. And Arnie was of the opinion, if you didn't like Rush and you didn't like Howard, then watch Wendy. And it was brilliant marketing.
Yep. In an age before there were cell phones and social media or any of that, it went viral organically.
And what's so interesting, it was before social media happened, and that's the one thing, because I really was the beginnings of reality TV and social media. And I was getting letters, and I was getting 1,000 stamped letters a week the first year, and I was getting 3,000 to 5,000 letters a week by the third year. And I just want to say to you, had I lasted long enough with Snapple, I would have been one of the first, I truly believe this, social media stars, with tweeting and, all of that stuff, because that was free. And people were paying money to get me those letters, 5,000 a week. That's 250,000 letters a year. Yeah, that's unheard of back in that day.
Before YouTube, before Facebook, before Twitter. Wow. Yeah, exactly. You nailed it. It was groundbreaking for that
and
to happen.
And the real world was just coming out. And the real world was just coming out, when I was doing it. So I'm thinking, that I was one of the people that was really in the fore, of reality television, because they were reality commercials.
And you mentioned it's just, God's plan for you, because you're absolutely right. When God does something, he tends not to do it the way that our human brain might map it out and think logically. What God does, and the Bible says this even, is he takes the foolish things to shame the wise of the world. So people who think that they're wise in their own eyes, God will do something the exact opposite way. Like he told Naaman, who had leprosy, and he went to go see Elisha the prophet. And Elisha the prophet sent out his servant to go tell the guy to go bathe in the Jordan River 7 times, and the leprosy would go away. He was so offended that Elisha wouldn't come out himself and tell him. And so, but he said, you know what? After his servant told Naaman, listen, Elisha told you to do an easy thing. Just go do it. He went into the river 7 times. The 7th time he came out, and his leprosy was completely disappeared. God takes the foolish things of this world to shame the wise. So God took what everyone was looking at. I mean, Hart was being put up there with, Anne being hidden in the black, because she's a little overweight. And then Nancy, who doesn't even sing, is out there with the guitar, and they regret ever doing that video. Like, it was so all about objectifying everyone and all the videos and all the TV. And so God says, you know what? We're going to take a normal person and we're going to make her a star. And it also was after you humbled yourself and you basically gave up and said, I surrender, and got totally sober. And God took you, just like he says, and he lifted you up and he blessed you and so many people out of that as well.
No question. No question. There's, in AA, there are the promises of AA. And I remember being at a meeting, in the beginning of my sobriety. And I remember thinking to myself, as I'm reading it, I'm not even going to look at this again, because the promises, it is so far down my pike, it'll never happen. I mean, I couldn't even fathom it. And then within, don't forget, so I went in 1989, got out in 1990, and I was working, I was just going to meetings in the beginning. That was all that I really could do, to keep it together. And then I took the Snapple job. And I just have to say, probably 2 years down the pike with Snapple, I remember going to a retreat, and again, those promises came up in one of the meetings that we were having. And I just remember, that I started to read them, and I just ran out of the room, and I just started to cry and sob and just be on my knees in such gratitude and thankfulness that I couldn't believe that I had already achieved the promises that they told me that I would have. I didn't know when, but I've been grateful ever since. There are no words for the gratitude.
And the gratitude for you being here today to share your story is immense. Our fans listening to Rock Stories with the Brumster, myself included, we're enjoying and so blessed for you to share your story and your stories about the rock and roll, of course, as well. But the human story, the story of your soul and the redemption of your life, and that, it's never too late. And now you enjoy rock and roll more than ever, right?
For years, I have to tell you, I was too afraid to go to a concert because there was so many issues with that, because music and drugs was all wrapped up into one. And I will tell you, as a last story, which is so interesting, the first concert that I finally chose to go to in my sobriety was over at Madison Square Garden. They had a theater upstairs, a smaller theater called the Paramount, and I went to the Paramount to see James Taylor. And I decided to see James only because I knew that he had a sordid past like me, and I knew that he was in the program. And the minute that the concert started, everybody, there were songs that were just unbelievably important songs in my life. And all of a sudden, James, wants to say hi to the audience, and he does, and says he's so happy that we're all there. And he's like, hello, my name is James, and I'm an alcoholic. And the whole place just said, hi, James. And I knew that I, at that moment, had picked the exact right concert for me to go to, because it was not threatening, and I knew with music also that I was finally home.
Right, because the music itself was never the problem. It was all of the sideshows associated with the music. But you, at 9 years old, you fell in love with the music, going to a show that you're thinking as a regular old field trip. I mean, you're not even thinking that at 9 years old that you're going to go see The Who. You know what I mean? You're not thinking you're going to go see Jethro Tull. You're like
Jethro Tull.
I mean, seriously, you're
no,
going.
you know what my ilk was? My ilk Friday night, Saturday night. It was the Partridge Family, man. Point me in the direction of Albuquerque. You know, we were all David Cassidy fans, and you know, listening to that. You know, with the band with Danny Partridge. Are you kidding? That was the deal.
From Danny Partridge to Ian Anderson on the flute. Oh my God, he must have been so awesome. Wow.
Crazy times.
Wendy Kaufman, friend of the Brumpster and a rock and roll aficionado and a super cool lady. So glad that you took your time out of your day to share your life and your stories with us and your rock and roll memories, Wendy. Before we let you go, though, just to kind of recap, you know, for our fans who might be struggling with addiction, let them know again, you know, it isn't too late. And what would you recommend that they do? Obviously, it has to be something that comes from them, because unless you're ready to surrender, it's just not going to happen, right? It's got to be a personal decision. Talk to them.
You know, like I knew, you know, that I had come to the end because I didn't even want to live anymore. And I literally asked God on my knees this final night, either kill me or help me to get well. And if you are, you know, that depressed and that unhappy, and in this world with all the fentanyl, and believe me, I've sat on drug boards and I know what's happening out there. You know, everybody who wants to get sober and really works a program can get sober. And I would just say, you know what, just go to an AA meeting. Even if you're a drug addict, my personal choice would be not to go to Narcotics Anonymous or any of that. The old timers, you know, that are out of AA, you know, to me, they are just some of the toughest people. And you know what? I got, even though I was a coke addict, I got my roots with these really, really tough, you know, Irish people, you know, that had come down the pike. And what I found so interesting about it is I wanted to be with people who were much different than myself, because I didn't want to hear the same opinion or the same point of view. I wanted to hear more points of view than the ones I already knew that I had grown up with traditionally and culturally. So I just say, go to the oldest person in the room. You know what I'm saying? You know, introduce yourself and ask for help, because they will know what to do with you, because the chances are right now some of these people have at least 35 to 50 years of sobriety, even more, and they will help you to help yourself. And all it starts with is one word: help. And somebody's going to help. I know it is the hardest thing to ask for help, but I tell you, it is the most freeing thing, because everybody I have ever, I don't ask it all the time, but everyone who I have been vulnerable to and have asked for help have always stopped and given it to me. And you don't have to pay money. You don't have to do a damn thing. You just have to go into a room and just please ask the oldest person in the room or somebody who's running the meeting for help.
And it's anonymous, right? Like, that's in the name. But for our listeners who are having any problems, they don't have to be afraid or embarrassed, because it is anonymous. It really does stay in that room, doesn't it?
You know what? It does, but you know, there's also, you know, some people are always sicker than others. So for me, you know, I was a little bit unnerved, you know, in my personal story, because I'm everywhere on TV, you know, and I'm representing, you know, made from the best stuff on earth. And I'm literally coming out, you know, from the rooms of AA as a cocaine addict. You know what I'm saying? So I was a little nervous back in the day. You know what I'm, because so I was a little tentative about sharing. I was an eager listener and an eager, you know, helper when people asked help. to go for coffee afterwards or whatever. But I was very tentative. But what I was fortunate enough to do is by now I was making a living, and I found a therapist who had been 30 years sober, who was an Irish female, and she was from a whole different culture, like I said, and she became my therapist. So I went to her once a week, where I really could share with her significantly and substantially. She became a mentor also. The things that I felt uncomfortable about sharing in a meeting because I was too afraid, because I was so close to the National Enquirer and things like that. Those people, some of them were in my meetings. You know what I'm saying? So
Right.
I didn't want to feel threatened or exposed because I was in the middle of New York City. So that's why the anonymity got me a little bit crazy and a little nervous. But mostly over the country, the programs evolved much. The world has evolved much. Now you can be on Zoom, and take care of it. Although I like them in person, I think personal socialization and connections with people are significantly important to your growth and to your well-being in general, especially when you're in a lonely place. And I just say go. Don't walk, run to a meeting.
You're not alone. You're not alone. And you got Wendy here as well, and the Brumster, Rock Stories with the Brumster. Thank you, Wendy Kaufman, for sharing your stories with us today and your personal story of just overcoming. Thank you. God bless you. I'm so glad that you rocked with us today, Wendy. Wow, we could sit here for hours. I just, the type of conversations,
and we will be in
right?
touch on Facebook. We will be in touch on Facebook. And you know what? If anybody wants to reach out, they can on Messenger. I am a Facebook away. And you know what? It's always about doing for others. Always.
Rock on. I'm so thankful for you. Wendy, hang on the line for our engineers, and thank you for coming on Rock Stories with the Brumster.
Oh, thank you so much, Brumster.
Rock Stories with the Brumster, the Snapple lady. Totally rocking memories, man. I can't believe it. 9 years old and goes to Tanglewood, a place where John Williams and the orchestra go play and practice. The Star Wars guy, right? The Star Wars music, taking the orchestra there. She thinks she's just going on a regular field trip. And she goes to Tanglewood, and bada bing, bada boom, The Who and Jethro Tull are there, and she's 9 years old, beginning a rock and roll lifetime of just loving music. And after that, she works at Platypus, the record store, and gets to hear all the new jams. She checks out Van Morrison, Dave Mason, Steely Dan, Boston, Billy Joel, listening to Rumors. Wow, we really went. James Taylor, first concert back after sobriety. The Snapple story. Wow, what an awesome story. What an awesome lady, and what an awesome life. You hear it all right here. Real Rock Stories with the Brumster. Every single Sunday, 11 to noon. Right here at rockradio559.com, the Brumster Spotify channel, and check us out at the Brumster Facebook page. Be an FOB, a friend of the Brumster. That's with 2 M's. Awesome. Well, until next time, thanks again to Wendy Kaufman for being on Rock Stories with the Brumster today. And thank you for joining us right here, this awesome podcast. Always got a new one coming out. Rock Stories with the Brumster. All right, rock on. Have a great week.